Never started a podcast like that before, but maybe I should make it my intro. Ethan, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing?
Doing great. Happy to be here.
I am excited to have you. We have spoken a bunch about newsletters. We've spoken a bunch about AI. We've spoken a bunch about tech. I think I've heard about it before, but can you tell me a little bit about your background from a technical side? Because I think I remember you grew up just building stuff naturally. If I'm right in saying that, right?
Yeah, so I've been building software for basically as long as I can remember. I actually started programming about like 6 months after I learned to read. So like 9 years
Wow.
old, I started coding. I had my first software company with revenue by the time I was about 13. So I built that up over the next 10 years there throughout high school and college, then graduated looking for the next thing. So the first thing I built is a product called Extemp Genie, which is actually for basically speech and debate competitors in high school. So it's like a super niche little tiny market selling to schools and colleges and high schools mainly. But that was where I initially cut my teeth, and then on to bigger and grander things. So been coding my entire life.
I wish I had your brain, to be honest. I find it. I think I tried to get into what was it like Visual Basic or something during high school,
That's a
and
horrible language. You started at the wrong spot. So you had lost before you even started there.
I did hate it. I don't know, maybe I started too late, where I was like playing RuneScape and
Mm,
Minecraft and Modern Warfare 2 before I was
yeah.
coding.
No, like it's just like when I was a kid. I remember like the first time I like my dad's an engineer forever, and so he like showed me some basic stuff, and then it was just a light bulb went off, and I was like, this is my thing. And then I was like 9, 10 years old, so I remember like 2 weeks later I was like literally sitting in like Sunday school, like writing Python for loops on the back of my coloring sheet in crayon. Just because I was like,
Wow.
that's my thing. It's not for everybody, right? Everybody doesn't have that right type of mind. But and it's kind of interesting too because I sort of like I guess like co-evolved with the software, if that makes sense.
Hmm.
So like just because that's something that I've been doing for so long, it's like the analogy that everything else is built upon, right? So like when I think about like building the agency, I've always like viewed it basically as a software product, essentially just with like components that are humans and components that are ClickUp automations, and components that are all of those different types. So it's I guess it's been the seasoning that flavored everything else that I've done.
Let me tap into that for a second. My experience with AI kind of started around 4 years ago. I started to hear about it from my friends that studied computer science and machine learning during the university years. But I imagine that you kind of tapped into the idea of machine learning and AI at a much earlier age. Can you tell me about like your first experiences of hearing about it, understanding it, and playing about with it?
Yeah, absolutely. So, first off, a couple of pieces of definitions there, right? Like AI is a very broad term, but these days when people say AI, they really mean LLMs, right? They mean language models. So I had done some classical machine learning stuff before, like building like classifiers and training, like regression algorithms and stuff like that. That was what it was basically up through like, the 2010s. And then really language models only kicked off in their current form like 2017, 2018. And I was right there at the start of it, at least, watching and cheering from the sidelines, I guess I would say. And, I very distinctly remember reading a few of those first papers that came out, right? The GPT-1, the GPT-2, Google's Palm model very early on was one of the first times that I saw like inside a paper where, it very clearly like generalized outside of its training distribution. And you could like see that it knew and understood language. I think the first time where I was like mind absolutely blown this was in the Google Palm or Palm 1 or Palm 2 papers, and it was showing how it explained a joke and right like the reason why the joke was humorous. That was a new joke. It didn't appear anywhere in the training data set, but it like understood the joke and understood like the social context around it and why a human would find it humorous. And I was like, okay, that's it. The rocks are talking. Like we've cracked it. And since then, I've basically just been like completely and utterly obsessed because it's the most interesting and unexpected thing that's happened. I think just overall, not just in tech, but just like for me in my life overall. Because like I said, like I've been working with the computers forever, from a very early age, and then just all of a sudden they started to wake up in a very different and unique way. And that was just, very, very fascinating and shocking. So I did work. I did some like programmatic SEO stuff, fine tuning some old T5. transformer models from Google back in like 2018, 2019. And then, I was one of the first, I was an early person on the list for ChatGPT, right? Like I got the email when that research preview went out that morning. It was actually, I was in Venice on my honeymoon, it turns out, when that email
Wow.
came out, and I was late for breakfast because I was playing around with it. Um, and my wife was like, Ethan, like we're on our honeymoon in Venice, and I'm like, but this thing is really cool. So
Wow, that's insane. And then talk me through that. So you're playing around with ChatGPT at this point. I'd actually like to hear the founding story between you, Sean, and Lewis as well. From what I understand, you guys know each other from college years, but can I talk to me about the formation of like Orbit Marketing and what it first looked like?
yeah, so I'll go through the whole, and this is how like most things work like this, where it's like, all of the pieces, and then there's this like long causal chain that goes back, and then it all ties together. But so me and Lewis did go to school together, right? So we both went to University of Alabama. I was computer engineering, he was comp science. So we overlapped some classes here and there. And then basically after college, we also did some like entrepreneurship accelerator programs together through the school. So we knew each other. Um, the first time I was ever impressed by him actually was I saw he had created this like insane Notion table. That was like when Notion was very early, and I was like, whoa, this is like the most organized, insane thing I've ever seen. And so that like stuck in my head, and he saw me coding away, and that stuck in his head. And then roll forward about 2, 3 years up until we had both graduated college, and it was actually Sean and Lewis starting off together. They are like close friends from back in like I think even middle school. They've known each other forever. And so they were doing Orbit Metrics, which is our data analytics and big data side of the business. And then that was the summer of, I guess it would have been the summer of 2023, I think, which was really when, that's like when you guys started up, right around that time period. That's when GPT-4 had just dropped. There was like magic in the air, and everybody was just ravenous for AI solutions. Still are, but especially at that period of time, they really were. And so there was some client work that floated through for Orbit Metrics that was very AI heavy. And so they tapped me in as a contractor on that, very much like what I delivered on that. And then I came on full time and, was like signed on as a co-founder, and then we were off to the races. So
All right, interesting. So data analytics to start with, and we've now transitioned. Obviously, you still do the data analytics side of the business, right? That still operates,
yeah,
but it's not the main
it's,
focus.
Orbit's more of a family of companies than anything else, right? So
Yeah.
there's Orbit Metrics, which is big data analytics. There's Orbit Marketing, which is content marketing with a special focus on email marketing. And then there's Orbit Flows, which is spun off within the past 6 months to a year there, which is really productionizing a lot of the tools that we built internally. And there's, a very natural progression from one to the other throughout all of those pieces.
Well, I can not speak from experience when it comes to analytics, right? So maybe you can tie this piece into me, but the thing that obviously interests me most as a newsletter operator is the Orbit marketing side of things. So
Yeah,
something you guys have been offering for a long time and have even covered us sometimes when we can't make a newsletter deadline, you'll help out.
right.
The AI report with that as well. Talk to me about that. Done for you newsletters. Why start that in the first place? How do you decide on that as the offering?
Yeah, so a couple of reasons there. First off, we were looking for something that was scalable, and that was more possible to train other team members on, right? So training team members on like data analytics or custom AI solutions, which is what we were doing at the time, that's a harder thing to scale. And so we were looking for something that had like a huge amount of value that it could deliver to potential clients and customers, while also being something that we could actually like build out a functional team around without, like fighting tooth and nail for that very rare data and AI and software engineering talent. So that was really basically the original business hypothesis behind that. And it was really Lewis at the core of all of that. He just really like very strongly believed in the power of email and the power of owned audiences, and wanted to be able to bring that value out to our clients and their audiences as well. So it was really basically just like, this is a core, incredibly valuable marketing asset that a lot of people aren't focused on. People hear content marketing, they immediately think socials, they immediately think SEO content, right? And there was a period of time where those things worked really well, and they do still work very well. But SEO is way more competitive than it was back in year 2015. All the social networks they're not as much about organic reach as they used to be. It's all about you have to pay to play there very usually. And so email is sort of still one of those areas where you can build a completely owned audience that has, they have opted into you, they want to be there, they're waiting to hear from you, and you know that when you send that email, that there is a very high probability that they're actually going to get it. It's not going to have to, go to the great gods of the meta algorithm to figure out if it pops up on their social feed or not. They're there, they want to hear from you, you can talk to them directly. And so that's an incredibly high trust and high conversion and a high potential channel. But it's not something that a lot of people think about as part of their default marketing strategy very oftentimes, right? A lot of people are very focused on, sort of the outbound side of things and well, where do I go to find the new people that have never heard of me? And that's all well and good. But as I'm sure you know, and as I know from the agency and the software products and everything that I've ever done, most revenue that you're going to make is from people that already know you exist. Right? Unless you're in something like e-commerce or software to some extent, which are much more productized. But if you're doing services, if you're doing consulting, if you're doing coaching, if you're doing any, info products, even there, you've got to build that trust first. You have to have people who believe you and like you. And a newsletter is really one of the best ways right now to build that trust over time. So that's, that's the core value proposition there. I'm preaching to the choir here. But that was the reason why we started that off as the core of all of our offerings.
What have you noticed in terms of appetite and understanding when it comes to new clients? Has that changed over the past 2 years? I feel as if the whole newsletter thing has flourished. Are we now over the hump of that, or is it still flourishing?
Yeah, so very good question there. So I would say that early on, there was more so people being like, well, why is this even a thing that I should do? Right? I only have 100 people on my list. What's the point of emailing them? Why does that even matter? But over time, people have seen, the growth of platforms like Beehive. They're probably subscribed to more newsletters. They're more familiar with the media type, and they're much more open to it, enthusiastic for it. Now, over the same period of time as well, of course, the number of newsletters being sent has scaled as well. And basically the question there is are we at or past or approaching peak newsletter? And I really think the answer is just absolutely not. If there's literally one channel of media that I expect to last for the next 1,000 years, it's actually email, right? I think probably every other social platform is going to come and go, but email is ancient. Right? If you think back to it, email, the core protocols underneath that, they predate HTTP. They predate the web as we think of it ourselves right now. And it's so deeply wired into everything, just all the ways that we interact with computers and do business and everything else there. Now, sure, people are probably going to get perhaps a little bit more picky about what they're subscribed to. But if you're producing really good stuff for the right audience, they're absolutely still going to want that. It's just all about delivering value. I don't even necessarily think that I think we're definitely not at peak. I don't know if there's ever going to be a peak necessarily. I mean, there's a period of time usually where new media formats open up and there's sort of a little bit of a gold rush and you're there's easy money there. But there's easy money doesn't really exist. It's just not a thing that ever is there, at least not for an extended period of time. And I think as long as you really focus on those core fundamentals, which is content that people actually want to read, stuff that really delivers value to them, that's going to be a channel that lasts for centuries.
Other than just the quality of the content, what else you're marking as a real moat when it comes to email? Because when I think about this, I think, okay, the models are getting better every day. It's never been easier to produce really high quality personalized content if you're working through a bunch of APIs.
Right.
So when I'm looking at this, I'm the only kind of moat we have is content that can't be found anywhere. So original content, right? Whether that's interviews, whether that's us having columnists, having speakers on, which is something that's launching soon. I'm very excited to talk about it. And your IP and reputation, that people know you and people trust you. Is that everything that's there? The quality of the content, the IP, the reputation, the original content. Is there anything else that's there? Maybe if you could expand on them as well.
Yeah, so this is, a newsletter is just a form of media, right? And so these are the same questions as a form of media matures that every single other form of media has had to wrestle with, right? What is unique? What is that exclusive scoop? What is the story that you can break first? What is the real actual journalism that you can conduct to bring information out there from the world and bring it to the audience's attention. So that's one piece of that. There is, like bringing in that new information, the stuff that they haven't heard before, right? Like that's why I'm talking to you right now. That's why you're talking to me right now. That's why we're here. So I think very much getting the personal aspect in there is important. One thing that we've seen work again and again and again and again is really people are interested in other people, right? So people want to hear individual stories. So having newsletters that are very much founder centric, or the business leader centric. This is what what's it called? It's the guy that runs Beehive, Tyler.
Tyler
His
Denk.
yeah, his newsletter is very much, it's not about Beehive. It's not like a roundup of email marketing tips. It's like him and his journey and his story building that company. And it's one of the most subscribed ones out there, period, because it's authentic, because it's real. And
And
so
it's
that's why, for
beautiful.
instance, yeah, and
Very
it
well
is
designed
gorgeous,
as well.
right?
Yeah.
And it's just so interesting and visually unique there. So, there's not a lot of low hanging fruit anymore, I would say. But what people are always interested in is stories from humans, because everybody has life experience. Everybody has, those details of what they've seen work in their business, in their industry, in their life. And people want to hear those details and those stories, especially over time as well. And that's one of the cool things about a newsletter, if you do it right, is that, the more you talk to people over these channels, the more they come to trust you. And the more they trust you, the more valuable it is to talk to them over those channels. So it's sort of it's a self-reinforcing loop there, basically, where as you're building trust with people, the value of that individual personal content from your own stories, from your own experience, from your own beliefs and strategies becomes more valuable over time as that trust builds. So there's no golden arrow. There's no super secret way to do that other than just like be authentic and bring real value to the table.
Talk to me more about your job at Orbit Marketing and how you enable this. So obviously from here, a lot of the clients you probably have, and correct me if I'm wrong, either larger kind of B2B companies or B2B individuals, right? Like kind of thought leaders. And what
Yeah.
you're doing is you're effectively enabling the communication of them with their audience to push through to some final goal, whether it's more reach, more engagement, more closed sales, affecting the bottom line in some way. Tell me more about what you guys actually do in practice.
Yeah, awesome. So I am basically now mainly out of the day-to-day of Orbit Marketing itself. I'm over on the software side, but all of those like processes and strategies and things were things that I helped lay down initially. And so, we go through a multi-step process. So, we onboard people, we build out a super detailed specification of exactly what their newsletter is going to be, how it's going to be uniquely valuable to their audience and uniquely based around what that founder or company or business can contribute to their audience. And then we set that all up and we get it running. The basic real business proposition behind a newsletter, though, and this is a thing that a lot of people miss, is that it is like your global Swiss Army knife there, basically. It's because if you build the business right, and this can be any type of business, right? So we've worked with software companies, we've worked with service providers, we've worked with, like super high ticket entrepreneurship accelerators. We've worked with all sorts of different types of businesses. But anytime that you get somebody's email, right, that could be because they bought a low-priced product through one of your funnels. That could be because they came in from an ad and signed up for your newsletter directly. That could be because you've been, doing cold outreach to them in the CRM and they've expressed interest, like, great, loop them into the newsletter. You can only follow up with people so many times. You can only say, like, hey, do you want to buy my thing again? Like maybe 5 or 6 times before people are just not at all interested there. But rather than doing that, rather than having to follow up in that manual way, if you have a media brand spun out as well, you stay top of mind. People remember that you exist as you deliver them value without making a hard sale to them. So basically, you can kind of think about it as retargeting ads. It's a very similar thing here, right? Where it's basically lifting the conversion of your entire funnel. Because, maybe your SDRs, if you're in like a marketing agency or something like that, they're going to be reaching out to people. They're going to be talking to them. Well, great. They can only follow up so many times. And meanwhile, maybe they reach out on Tuesday. On Thursday, they now get something showing your thought leadership, showing your experience, showing a case study that you've got with one of your clients. And that raises the conversion of everything else that you're doing. So, we worked with a software company, for instance, was one client that we have. And it was for them, it was all about retention, right? And they were a software company where basically people paid to launch campaigns on it. And so people remembering that they exist on a regular basis is critical to driving that bottom line. So you want to be omnipresent, right? And that's a newsletter is one part of the strategy of doing that. You want to be part of people's lives and part of people's days and part of the informational diet that they are consuming. And there's really no better way to do that than email.
Broad question, but what have you learned about trust, authority, and credibility when it comes to emails? What are the cornerstones to that?
Yeah. So that's a very good question right there. First off, I would say that value is what builds trust, right? So especially if you're looking at a B2B audience, or even like a prosumer, more professional consumer audience, people are looking for things that give them value, right? And so if they are taking away something that is actually useful, that's a deposit in the bank of trust there. Now, on the other side of that, if you're sending them something that they already know, if you're sending them something that's patently false, if you're sending them something that's boring or that they got in an email from a different person yesterday, right? That's withdrawing from that bank of trust there. And so that's really a core piece of it there, is value builds trust, right? And another thing that I would say too that we've seen a lot of success with as well is if you build the newsletter basically sort of as somewhat of a separately branded entity from the business itself, right? So rather than that, people tend to trust like a media entity, right? And like I know that there's a lot of distrust in media right now, but still, nonetheless, you trust like the thing that is providing you information more than the thing that is just explicitly and obviously trying to sell you something, right? So if you basically come in with this is a media publication sponsored by my company, that is starting off on a much stronger foundation of trust rather than just like, that's why Tyler has his newsletter that is branded around him and has sort of a separate entity and branding and domain and style and structure versus Beehive itself. It's not just like Beehive Weekly, right? Like that doesn't have the same level of trust because you know that they're trying to sell you something over that. But I would not be surprised at all if more revenue for Beehive has come totally from that personal newsletter that they started off with there and that they drove things through rather than just the standard marketing emails that go out from the Beehive brand. So two things there: really deliver value, and then build a brand around the value that you're delivering there as a separate thing too. And then people are going to be more likely to want to buy the other things that you can co-sell inside of that media brand that you build out.
How did you guys decide? I mean, I feel as if I know the answer to this, but between you, Sean, and Lewis, how did you decide who was going to be like the face of your business? Because I feel as if Lewis is always the one doing kind of public speaking. I'm happy,
Yeah.
I'm ecstatic to have you here. But was that a discussion you had to have?
Yeah, so really basically what it was there is, Lewis has always been more on the content side of things, on the marketing side of things. He's got his own lovely podcast that he's been running for a very long time. And so he had that network, that social following already, so it made sense for him to really lean into that and capitalize on that. Me and Sean both love publicly speaking. We both love doing podcasts. We love talking to people, but we're also very much just like, okay, I would be very happy being in a cave, building my business, building my software, not talking to anybody, having nobody know that I exist at all for the next year. That sounds lovely, right? So like we're happy to make the public appearances, but by default, and that's the software developer in me there really, is that like my default is like heads down, let's build the thing, let's deliver something that people love. So that's sort of how that and everybody has their strengths and their weaknesses and their things that they bring to the table initially. And so there was never like an explicit decision on that. It's more so, and that's the great thing too that I don't know, if anybody out there is considering starting a business, like get good co-founders. That's the only thing that matters. The idea that you're working on matters, sure. The market that you're going after matters, but the foundation of it all is you've got to have good people that you're working with because everything else is going to spring out of that.
100%. And that's something I want to circle back to at the end of this conversation as well, is like how you're actually navigating that as a partnership, what kind of systems you have in place. It seems as if everything's very well oiled from what I've seen. But we'll tap back into that at the end of the conversation. What I want to go back into is kind of what you mentioned there, right? Is like you've had your head down for a very long time now doing the software dev on OrbitFlows. And I really want to kind of dispel some myths that have been perpetuating around this landscape of how easy it is to build an AI app or AI SaaS. So firstly, tell me what you have developed thus far and what it does.
Right. So OrbitFlows is really the realization of all of the internal tooling that we built out to help with creating just really fantastic written deliverables that entrance audiences and doing it fast. Right. So there's a lot of AI content products out there which are very much just focused on bulk. Right. They're just focused on printing out a ton of kind of like slop. Right. And that's been the model for a lot of those. We don't want to be a slop printer, right? We want to be much more like how Cursor is, right? Which is like a software engineering tool. Or we want to be something that works with people to help them craft that perfect piece of content that acts as the support infrastructure around them, that pulls in all of those things that they need. So it helps you. You can define your exact business context, all of the details of your audience, everything about who you are and how you sound. You train it on past examples of your own work so that really deeply understands the style and structure and tone of how you operate. We've got research agents inside of it. We've got quality assurance agents inside of it. All of those things basically pulled together into an end-to-end platform that lets you go from, I need to produce this piece of content and it has to be absolutely stunning, to, oh, look, it's done already and I'm proud to publish it. So that's the end-to-end of what OrbitFlows is right now. But that has taken, and we've got an incredibly aggressive roadmap ahead of us over the next several months. It is already amazing. It is going to be stunning very soon. And software is hard. Anybody that has ever worked on a large software product knows that. Software is a uniquely difficult thing to do. It is the easiest that it has ever been to build software, right? And it is the fastest that it has ever been to build software. Like I said, I've been building software companies since I was really like 11 years old in one way or another. And back then it was nothing like it is now. So not only did you not have the AI tools that we have, but there also just wasn't that base layer of infrastructure, right? So you didn't have, Google Cloud and Firestore and all of these APIs. React didn't exist. None of these things existed that make your life easier as a developer. And so it was very much just slower and going from those core aspects. Now, what you were talking about there basically is there's this sort of like the myth of the vibe coded startup, right? And I guess I can address that there, which is that AI is an accelerator, right? It objectively is. And it's going to let you move faster and it's going to let you move further. That is what Flows does for content, right? And that's what tools like Claude Code and Cursor do for software development. But with that in mind, the hardest thing in any business, and especially inside of a software business, is where you point that acceleration, right? Moving fast is very good, but moving fast also allows you to move very fast in the wrong direction. And so that's one thing that a lot of people notice. And yes, it is fast to spin up that initial thing. It is fast to get something off the ground where you can hit a button and something happens. Congratulations. What do you do next? Right? And if you really want to, especially to go after a business audience as well, there's this just incredible well of things underneath that have to come in. You have to have authentication. You have to have billing. You have to have security. You have to have email tied in. You have to have team accounts and memberships and invites and permissions. And all of those things are really just table stakes to then get to the point where you have a platform that you can then build your unique value on top of. Yes, it is easier to build an individual piece of software, but guess what? It's a competitive market. That means that people's standards are higher too, right? What people expect a product to be able to do is much higher bar than it used to be. The performance and how much things people want bundled inside of it, that bar goes up. That's the lovely thing about a free market, right, is that it does make everything difficult, which means that it makes it very great to be a consumer inside of a market. And software is an incredibly competitive market because your competitors are all right around you, right? They're all next there on the Google. It's like you're a bakery here, and there's nothing but bakeries as far as the person who wants to buy your bread can see. So the standards have risen a lot there. I think I don't really know where so much this sort of myth that you can just like vibe code $1 million startup in a weekend came from. I think it
it comes from people that see a quick buck to be made. It's content
Yeah,
creators that understand that this grabs attention in headlines and
it
people are
does.
going to click on it and then they'll join their community and then give them money for it.
Yeah. I think so. So part of this really is that there was a step change where it used to be that in order to build any code, in order to build any amount of software, you absolutely had to be a developer, right? So you couldn't even get to like 10% of something if you didn't have the fundamental skills. And then a lot of these, like vibe coding tools came along, and suddenly your average person can get like 20% of the way there, right? But that long tail of things is incredibly difficult. And this is, I forget, there's a psychological rule here, basically. It has a name for it. I want to find it. It's on the tip of my tongue. But it's that you think things are easier when they're things that you know less about, right? The more you know about a
Mm.
problem, the more you understand how hard it is, the more you discover the nuances and the depths and the difficulty of that. And a lot of people went from a world in which, they're dreaming of building this software company, and then suddenly they see a button and they're like, I was never able to make that button be there. That's fantastic. That's all I need. But there's so much more inside of it there. And I think also as well that there has just been always there's somewhat of a very toxic startup culture that came from it came from a couple of things, right? So there is a period of time where the internet happened, right? And where software as a service happened. And there was just an incredible land grab of open opportunities that were just sitting there. And, we have these like great grand mythical stories, of like Mark Zuckerberg, a teenager, just building this, $1 trillion business. And that was a very unique time, but that was what a lot of the ethos that I grew up on as well was, right? So, because I've been building companies since I was very young. I built my first one. It's a lovely company. It's still doing fantastic, but it's in a cash market, right? There's not that much room to expand inside of speech and debate for high school competitors in one specific event, right? That's a very niche thing. So I've always been looking for what's that next big market that I can break into? What's that next big startup idea? And I've done everything across time there. I've done so many different software products over the years, everything from like social networks built to help you meet up in person to a printable planner designing app, right? And there's all of these different things, and you try so hard, but it's very difficult to get that market and to get all of those pieces right. So I lost my train of thought there a little bit, but basically what I was trying to say here is that people have dreams, right? They've had this narrative sold to them that all they need, and they think that being able to just put that button on the screen is the key thing that they're missing, and that's the only skill that they're missing to be able to build a company. But that's not the only skill, right? You need that, and you need the knowledge of what button should be there, and how should it tie in, and what's happening in the market, and can you find the right co-founders, and can you raise the funds if you need it, or if you're not going to raise, can you bootstrap cash flow quickly enough, right? It's a uniquely difficult thing to do, and getting a button on the screen is just the very first step, right? That's the minimal thing. And I hate predatory business practices. I hate people that prey on others' hope and others' dreams. But there was we saw the same thing, a couple years ago in blogging, right? There was a whole suite of, the joke is that it's bloggers all the way down, right? It's bloggers selling courses on how to sell courses on blogging to other bloggers. And we're kind of seeing the same thing repeat in software right now. But what people are going to run up against is that the market moves forward. Building valuable things is hard. Knowing what to build is hard. Building it well, marketing it well, all of those things are hard. Building companies is hard, but it's very uniquely rewarding. And you've got to be in it for the long run. You've got to have your team with you. You've got to have your vision. You've got to staple it to your wall, and you've got to go pursue it no matter what. And a weekend of vibe coding won't get you from here to there.
Maybe you don't have an answer to this, but I am curious with your experience as a developer and being able to recognize like good SaaS from bad SaaS, being able to
Yeah.
demarcate that difference. Is there any kind of SaaS companies out there right now that really have no intrinsic value but have a huge valuation that you can point your finger to and be like, that's a pile of shit?
Yeah, okay. So that's a very interesting question. Let me think. Who out there is Vaporware right now? So, and it's interesting because like I love them. I use them every day. But Cursor, I actually feel like is kind of a little bit on a rocky ground, right?
Okay.
They moved into the market very quickly. They had very smart discounts. They were some of the first people to really jump on that train. But if there's one thing that developers love to do, it is commoditize and make free tools for other developers, right?
Mm.
And so I would never want to be in a business where I was trying to sell something. Trying to sell software to software developers is a hard thing because they're just going to build the software, right? The barrier for entry for them, they're like, oh, I don't want to pay for this, I'll just build it, right? And like
Yeah.
you're seeing that start to happen now to some extent with things like like Claude Code coming in, and the model providers getting more involved, and then like Google's partial acquisition of Windsurf. So I would say like Cursor, I love the product, but I think they might be on a little bit rocky grounds there too. Um, then some of these, I would say as well, there was very much sort of like a gold rush around some of these like vibe coding businesses as well too. I'm not sure how their fundamentals are. Like I get what they're offering. I get that they're tying in, they're making it easier to go further faster for your average user, and that's valuable. But like code itself is going to become a commodity, right? As soon as things become easier to produce, they become a commodity. And you want to be in an area that has, I mean, no software product, my software product doesn't have a perfect moat. Nothing does. And I guess if I were to really roll this back though, you have to be able to adapt as well. So, what you want to be in the place of is you want to have a lovely blown up evaluation with absolutely nothing inside of it. And then you want to use that momentum to roll forward into the real useful deep tech. And like, for instance, with Cursor there, to give them credit, is I have seen over the past 6 months or so, the technical foundations of what they offer get just dramatically more advanced, right? So they are building up that moat and those core deep technical pieces. I would say too, though, that like the market does tend to be quite efficient there. So if there's a company that has a ton of money behind it, so I'm not going to say VC money, right? VCs buy into hype, but if they actually have real revenue behind it, if the hundreds of thousands of people have voted with their dollars, then there's something there, and you can generally trust that. So.
Circle me back into obviously what you've just mentioned there. We're talking about Vaporware, we're talking about actual valuation, building a moat with tech. You'd mentioned that you have a very aggressive roadmap for OrbitFlows. Tie those two pieces together for me.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a couple of key pieces there. First off is that people like. So let's talk about two things inside of this. So what you want to be doing with a software product is you want to find an initial slice of value. You want to connect that initial slice of value from top to bottom, and then you want to expand it as quickly and aggressively as you can, and ideally in a sticky manner. So what do I mean by this? So you look at a tool like Cursor, right? What's one problem with Cursor? All of the configuration is inside of your repository, right? It's there inside of your GitHub. You can pull down another IDE and get that spun up and swap tools instantly. You can install Claude Code and start working inside your repository inside of Claude Code very fast. You can switch tools really fast. Whereas if you look at a different business model there, if you look at something like ClickUp or Asana or Google Drive, right? Your data is living inside of those. And yes, you can export it. But for instance, like my business runs on top of ClickUp. We are ClickUp addicts. We adore ClickUp. It would take an incredible amount of effort for us to swap away from ClickUp because we have so many automations tied in, because we have dozens of people trained on how to use it, because we have all of our records in there, right? That's the type of platform that you want to be. So you want to be sticky. You want people to load what is unique about their business and their work into the product. Secondly, on top of that, you want to be able to expand horizontally, right? I think that very narrow vertical products are actually not going to be the long run thing that works there, because it is getting easier and easier to build an individual vertical slice of value. And that means that the thing that becomes rare and the thing that becomes valuable is the relationship with the customer, right? People don't like swapping tools. People like having everything in one place. They don't like having to replicate their business context across all of those different tools. They want one tool that is going to do all of those key things for them. So how does that tie into what we're building with OrbitFlows, right? So right now, OrbitFlows is very much focused around content writing, with an especial focus on primarily LinkedIn content and newsletter content, right? So structured, repeatable weekly deliverables. The thing is, though, is that, and we've noticed this as soon as we started off, is that as soon as people get their business context inside the product, right? So we have this thing called a profile. So you load up all of the background of your company and it interviews you and it pulls all of those details out. It scans your social media profiles and figures out what your voice sounds like, what your tone is, how you sound, all of those pieces. And what we found was that someone might get onboarded to do a very specific newsletter, or just like, I just want to make this batch of 3 LinkedIn posts every week. We're like, great, we'll set you up for that. But as soon as they're in the door, they immediately started wanting to use it for every single other thing, right? They're like, okay, well, can I use this for my SEO articles? Can I use this to do the SOPs that I hand off to my team for doing our software development on our internal tool, right? When people have a tool, they want to then go and use that tool all over the place. And so that's really basically the demand that we're sprinting to catch up with inside of the market. So we've got a bunch of new stuff that we're launching very soon. We have got a full, basically, AI chat interface that we are embedding inside of OrbitFlows right now. But the key differentiator there between that and something like ChatGPT is that it's built to have all of your business context loaded in, right? So imagine that you're working with multiple different clients. You can build out that incredibly detailed profile for every one of those clients. And then you have your copywriting templates in there to do copywriting work for them. You have your quality assurance templates in there. But now what we've noticed is that people also just want to brainstorm topics. They just want to discuss things with the AI. And so we're going to have that inside of that to build on that foundation with that business context that's been loaded in. The next steps of that, taking that a couple of pieces forwards is, and this was always my hypothesis from the beginning, is that writing is feature complete, right? If you have a tool or a workflow or a system that is able to write incredibly well, which we do, that means that it is able to think incredibly well. And because these models are fundamentally based on language. Yeah.
Double tap into that for me.
All right. So imagine that you had a mythic, beautiful, perfect box, and it could write any 1,000-word document. That my proposition here is that box, what would be inside of that would be super intelligence, right? Because if you can write any type of content extremely well, that includes scientific papers and moving things forwards and all of those things. The point that I'm basically making there is that language is a form of thought, right? And so writing things incredibly well, this is why we have so much of an education system built around reading and writing well. Language is the way that we compress thoughts, distill them, and communicate them to others. So by focusing really hard on writing as the first initial thing there, that actually leans forwards into thinking. For instance, I actually use an OrbitFlows template now that interviews me. It walks me through a couple of different pieces, and then I work with it, and it builds out a technical specification for a new piece of software that's actually going to be built on OrbitFlows, and then I take that and I hand that off to some of my software development AIs. What am I basically saying here? What you really need to do is you need to get something that understands you deeply. So that's the first piece, right? And that's the first piece that OrbitFlows has been built around, is that context is a limiting factor. Understanding you, your company, how you sound, how you speak, what you sell, all of those details. You lay down that base, and then on top of that, the models are capable enough of doing just an incredible amount of work once they actually understand you and your business and what it's all about.
When you're describing this platform, for example, ClickUp, when I first came onto ClickUp, it fucking terrified me, and I was like, almost. I think I made an account and closed it immediately, right?
Yeah.
So
no, Sean was always the ClickUp head at our company, and when I was first onboarded, he was like, "Yeah, ClickUp, da 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 da," and I was like, "What is this beast? I did not understand this. I do not like this."
So I guess the two things that make something really sticky is, one, are the outputs valuable to your business, right?
Mm-hmm.
Are the things that you use it for, and in your case, ClickUp's incredibly valuable for everything that you do. And two, can you reduce the friction to being onboarded as much as possible as well, right? Is there anything else that makes a product sticky apart from the output and I guess the UI, how easy it is to actually interact with in the first place?
Right. So there's two pieces that you talked about there, and they're parts of the equation. So the first one basically is what is the value prop of it, right? And this is why something like Salesforce can be so ridiculously expensive, is because so much money flows through Salesforce, right? So it's a very core business proposition there versus something like, I don't know, like, some little like to-do list app or something like that. It's just not as core. Even if you're really excellent at that, you're not a high value delivering thing. So you want to have something that's going to deliver value, right? Which is why we have, for instance, focused very much initially on marketing content production rather than, say, like creative novel writing, right? Is because one of those has a higher financial value associated with it. And so you get more literally financial value out of the platform. So what is the result that the piece of software or the product creates for the business or for the individual? That's one piece of it. The next piece that you mentioned there is how difficult is it to get to that result? And that's actually basically been the journey that we've been on recently, is that, so right now we offer complete done-for-you onboardings. We will set you up on the product. We will have our own internal prompt engineers build out all of those things and make sure that it is perfect and works for you fantastically. But we're moving towards a system where it's able to set itself up, right? And so the activation energy there is a very important and very large piece of that. What we're missing here, though, is there's a third component inside of this, which is the stickiness factor, right? And that's what is the switching cost. And that's basically like how much unique information lives inside of the platform. This is, I guess a very simple example of this is like a calculator, right? So like a calculator, like the starting cost, it's not hard to be onboarded into using a calculator. The value the calculator provides, like great, it does the numbers every time. But there's nothing that makes you want to keep that specific calculator versus another calculator that maybe has like a better solar panel on it, right? And so as a software product, you want people to get deeply involved inside of your tool, right? You want it to be an asset that they consider. You want them to have built those automations out that connect with it. You want them to have poured that information inside of it. That's why a thing like ClickUp can be very sticky, because it's a system of record, because it holds that data. And yes, you can export it, but you're never going to be able to perfectly export it and import it into another thing. So you want to be able to deliver a high amount of value. You want to be able to get people to that value fast, and then you want to continually become more indispensable to them over time. This is the same that it is, as an employer, as a company, or as a founder, in any way that you work with people. It's all of those same things, right? This is how agencies work too. This is how our agency works. You want to be easy to work with to start with. You want to produce great results, and you also want it to be not trivial for people to swap away from you, because you've built that deep understanding of them and that deep context. So the way that we're seeing that manifest inside of OrbitFlows is really two ways specifically. So first off, we have that profile, right? So we have all of your business context loaded up in there, the definition of your voice, the analysis of that. But then also every time you use a template inside of OrbitFlows, you can give the AI feedback. So you can say, I hated those bullet points. They were too long. You messed up there. Like, don't use that word. It remembers all of those things over time, right? So every time you critique it, the next time it does that task, it's building upon that learned information that it has. This is the same way that like humans are not easily replaceable inside of companies as well. Is you have that experience, you've learned from that feedback working with people, you know the context of the business, you've been trained over time, and then that's how you become indispensable. And so it's really the same thing here with the software product, is you want it to be growing and learning with the people that are using it, and that's how you're going to make it sticky in the long run.
What's the biggest piece of the puzzle that you've not solved yet? What do you do badly?
Yeah. That is a great question. Let me think about that for a moment. So honestly, I really don't feel like there are any unsolved problems other than just like executional bandwidth, right? Like I feel like we know how to market it. We just need more eyeballs on it. I feel like, we know how to improve every aspect of the platform. We know what the customers want. It's much more a game right now of just sprinting to catch up to what people are begging us to build for them, rather than that there is any one unique unsolved problem. So I would say there, maybe perhaps the unsolved problem is actually me. What do I mean by that? It's very hard to take vision for a product that has a very broad scope and has plans inside of plans inside of plans that, roll out in my head for the next year, for the next 2 years, for the next 10 years, right? It's very hard to take that trajectory and get it out onto paper and get it sliced and diced such that, we're bootstrapped right now, but even if we were to raise funds, it's right now somewhat like, man, like, well, I can only talk so fast, I can only scope so fast, I can only get those visions out there into the world so fast. So I would say that maybe that's the real bottleneck right now, is taking the vision and making it concrete and then executing on it fast. Like problems are always coming up, problems are always getting solved, but I would say basically that, and that's the problem that you want to have inside of a startup, right? You want to have the problem that, like, I'm just desperate to be able to execute on this vision as quickly as I can, and I want the people, I want the financing, I want the revenue, I want the investment to make that happen. That's the right type of problem to have. The wrong type of problem to have is the type of problem where you're like, people don't want what I'm building. People aren't interested. I don't know what to build. I don't know if we have any value at all, right? We've got all of the problems are very much in the how can we execute on that vision as quickly as possible quadrant, rather than in the, like, what are we building and do people want it area. So I guess what I would say inside of that is maybe our core thing that we're doing wrong right now is possibly we're not being aggressive enough, right? Like, maybe we should do a raise. Maybe we should dump gasoline on this and, build out that 10, 15 person developer team and just, like, absolutely scale it to the moon super fast. So maybe that's our core fatal flaw right now, is perhaps not being aggressive enough. Because I've been, like I said, so, I had one initial software product that was really very much a hit. And with that very niche market, right, and even initially too there, it was just homeschool speech and debate competitors. It was just inside the homeschool speech and debate league that I did, and feeling that pull from the market, right, where I was getting cold emails from people in, like, Virginia that I did not know, like, hey, I heard that you have this tool, can I use it, please? Right? We're getting that sort of pull from the market again right now, and I haven't felt that pull in like 10, 15 years, really. And so, if anything, I think it would be probably that we're just not, we're not running fast enough, and we always need to run faster. That's sort of a cop-out answer there, I basically feel like. But the problem is in the execution, right? Once you have the concept there, once you have something that the market wants, it's all in those day-to-day. It's in how do you get that next round of funding? How do you get that next person that is excellent at what they do? How do you find the people? How do you find the talent? How do you scale up the vision? It's all of the classic problems that we want to have and want to solve, but I don't think there's necessarily anything that is insolvable or particularly difficult. It's just a question of how fast can you make the vision real? How fast can you pull that stuff out of your head, get it into code, get it into the market, get it into people's heads, and make it real. So it's just always sprinting to catch up, which is what you want to be doing. So
I feel as if you guys move faster than any single company I know when it comes to development.
That is the best compliment that I have ever had. I very much appreciate that.
It's true though. And you can tell, like, when I speak to either you, Sean, or Lewis as well, like, it's just even the pace at which you speak and then hit me up the next day with, like, here's all the things we're going to do. And then next week, I know that, like, I can always rely on you for certain things to be done.
Yeah.
I mean, like, Orbit Marketing as an agency, one of the only agencies that we have consistently worked with over the years, because agencies are a fucking nightmare almost. Always.
Notoriously unreliable, honestly. And yeah. I say that as an agency owner that has over time worked with probably half a dozen other agencies. And the experience has generally not been good. And I know that this is like this is like people, I'm like, well, and my agency is exempt from that. But like I do actually think it is, and it's so a few things that we're talking about there, right? The pace of play matters. Right? Speed is valuable for speed in and of itself. It is always a race against time. How do we move fast? Couple of things there. So first off, I think that we have done a good job at focusing on, so like all three of us initially were very much generalists, right? So we can all roll our own software. We can all roll our own marketing content. We can all roll our own automations and project management and all of those pieces. And that means that there's a lot less communicational overhead, especially when things were initially getting off the ground. But part of it also there is really just setting the pace of play And I've noticed this over time too, as the company has grown from, I think it was just us three initially. And now I think we're up to like 12, 15, 16 different people across all the different segments, which is wild to think about. And then more contractors on board there too. What your job as a founder becomes is to be the clock of the company in a lot of ways, right? You can think of yourself as a metronome. What is that beat of progress that you are setting? You are the conductor. You are keeping the orchestra flowing and moving and in time. And that timekeeping aspect of things is absolutely critical. So there's a couple of if I can go into these, there's some very fundamental business management systems and styles and techniques that we have learned over time that have served us very, very, very well. I can touch on a few pieces of that. So the first one is that we use a system called EOS, which is Entrepreneurial Operating System. Hundreds of thousands of other companies operate on that same system too. And really all that is basically is it's a specific cadence and pulse of meetings. It's a specific way of setting goals on a quarterly basis. Everything really hinges around this one glorious meeting that is the core of everything, which is called an L10 meeting. And the goal with that is that it is a level 10 meeting, and that has a specific defined agenda that you run through every single time. The first part of it is looking at a numerical scorecard that is kept up to date every week, right? So everybody inside of the company has multiple numbers that they are responsible for. Those numbers are reported on a weekly basis. We make sure that those numbers are moving where we need to. There is an issues list inside of the L10 meeting. So basically, rather than just fires popping up during the week and us dropping everything and dealing with them, if they can be punted forward to that time when all of us are in the same room to go through that structured issue solving way, that's what we do there. So it's really, and this is also, I am a software developer. Lewis is actually a software developer too. Sean is a software developer as well. So we all came into business thinking of it as a software product. Right, so it's what while loop, what for loop can we put around the outside of this business? And we know if we just run through that system like a little well-trained AI agent, right? If we run along those well-trodden paths, we will get where we need to go. And so it's, we don't want anything to depend upon people's intuition or discipline or how you're feeling on a given day. It's you follow the given process. You follow that pulse of meetings. Every meeting has a preset agenda. We run through each one of those pieces. Everybody knows what they're accountable for. There's a pulse to the work. There's a feeling for it. And that lets you move fast. So you lay out those core fundamental pieces, and then you can move fast. A lot of businesses run like chaos. I feel like my business runs like chaos just because I have a very high standard for what that is. But being behind every other business, I know from what I've seen behind the scenes of other businesses, I know it's complete chaos there. And so taming that is how you are able to move fast. This is what sets apart companies that are able to scale versus companies that are not able to scale, is really solving a lot of those initial bottlenecks. And I think that we've done a fairly good job with that. We can always do better. But we have those pieces in place, and that's what lets us move forwards and move on. And then this is the cool thing, too, that's happened relatively recently, is initially that structure, that EOS structure, right, was just me, Lewis, and Sean. It was just something that each of us did as founders. But what's happened over time is as each of those individual business segments have spun up and matured, is that we've pushed that system down to individual heads of each of those departments. So now there's actually 4 L10 meetings that happen on a weekly basis, one for each one of the individual business segments led by the department head of that, and then one which is sort of like an admin level L10 that's just the 3 co-founders inside of that. And that means that we know that every single week it's probably 150 numbers that are the key things inside of all of those different business segments are going to be looked at, are going to be talked about. Every issue that comes up is going to be addressed. And we have trust in that. And we have faith in those systems. And that means that we can let a fire burn until the next L10 meeting, right? There's an immune system in place for the company. And what you really, and this is why when you raise the question basically of what do you think that you do poorly, which there's plenty of things there, but they're all solved by what I think we do well, which is that we have processes in place. We have feedback loops for making sure that if something is going off track, we're immediately aware of it and we can immediately then bring it back on track. I have complete faith that if we just follow the operating systems that we have laid in place, that we will continuously grow and we will continuously mature as a company and achieve those goals. And so you really want to start by building out, if I did the same 10 things every week, and I did nothing other than those 10 things, would I get to where my goals are 10 years from now? And if you have systems in place where you can say yes to that, great, you're off to the races, follow those discipline systems, and you'll get from A to B. It's all about the process, not about the place that you're trying to go. You got to build the process, trust in the process, iterate on the process, follow the process, and you'll get from A to B.
We know where A is for you. We know what your process is.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know where B is? What does B look like?
That is a very great question. So where is B, right? And this is something that is, very interesting as a company of companies right now. Really where B is space. There is a reason why there are the words orbit inside of the name. The goal is to get into orbit, right? The goal is ultimately that all of these things come from the first day that I joined the company and came on. Sean has had this motto, which was services to software, software to space, right? Which is basically essentially a bootstrapping process from going here to where we really want to get. Because the future of humanity lies out there in the cosmos, and we want to be a part of that. And it might seem grandly wild, but that journey started when the first invoice to a client went out. That journey went up another notch when the first payment for our software product came through on Stripe. Right? Orbit's right there in the name. It's sitting there staring at us. We talk about that every month, and that's where we're going.
I had no idea that was the story behind it, and I hope someone looks back on this podcast in 10 years' time.
It's okay to be wildly ambitious. You don't get anywhere if you're not, right? You fail at every single thing that you do not try to do. Hard things are doable. They're not doable instantly. They're not doable easily. But if you have sufficient discipline and force applied to a problem across sufficient time, you will crack it. And so that's really all that it is about there, is like stay true to your values as a company, stay true to your vision of where you want to go, get ridiculously obsessed over process and over customer and over delivering value, and you will get from A to B.
I feel as if any listener right now has got a very intimate understanding now of your business, how it works, what you're solving for, what your knowledge is, and why you're doing this as a business. But I want to finish off on a question I ask every single one of my guests. And you can kind of take what context you want from it and take a couple seconds, take a beat before you answer as well. Just think about it. Why do you do what you do?
That's a good question. I am going to take a couple of seconds to think on that. I'm going to take a couple more seconds.
It's good that you're taking time because a lot of people answer instantly, so take as long as you want.
And I'm sort of shocked and awed by the fact that not only has nobody else ever asked me that question, but really I have not asked myself that question very frequently. If I were to trace it all back, what I would really say it is it's not for the money, right? Yes, there is a possibility of a large financial payoff, and I'm already, much further along that journey than I was, years to months ago. There is, like working with good people is lovely and a great time, being able to work from home, being able to work on your own terms. All of those things are grand and beautiful. But really what I think it is that I have always loved building a thing, right? So it is, I've always said this to people too, which is that, I struggle with I struggle with focus. I struggle with staying on track with things. And it's specifically software that I've always been uniquely obsessed with and uniquely focused on. I've always joked that, like, it could have been like woodworking, right? It just so happens that the thing that I've been like neurotically obsessed with for over a decade is something that like society finds valuable. And so if I were to really answer why is it that I do what I do, and why do I wake up at 5 a.m. every morning and grind on it, it is for the joy of building something. And software and product and businesses as well, even digital businesses, right? They're a digital entity. It's a uniquely malleable medium to work inside of. It's an art form in a lot of ways, and that's what makes being. There's a lot of things that make being a human interesting, but one of them really is that opportunity to say this thing didn't used to exist, and now it exists, and I made that happen. Right? I took something from non-existence into existence. And that joy of being a creator, of being a builder, I think really at the core of it, that is what drives me. Because there are higher paying jobs in the valley that I could go get. They might not have the same like maybe glorious financial payoff on the long term, but if you take the expected or risk discounted value of that, a purely selfish actor would be on one of those paths. But the joy of building, the joy of taking something and pushing it out there into the world is, I think, really what drives me. And I'll close out here on a little story there, which is very cool. So, I started off my first software company when I was 11, made first dollars off of it when I was 12, 13, scaled that through high scale, still running that. It's basically, in its own little niche there. But when I went off to college, it was a very wild moment where I like sat down, this like freshman year, you're eating the dining halls, you're like trying to make some friends, nobody there. I sit down, I start talking to this guy. I discover that guess what? He used to do speech and debate, and he knew my product and had used my product. And I was like, that's just insane. And the joy of making something that people like and that people love, and taking something and bringing it into existence. So it's really for the joy of the music, of the creation, of the art form. And it's a grand old game to play, and I love to play it.
That was beautiful, absolutely stunning. I love that as an answer, and I want to add in a little anecdotal story as well, just to finish off. Went to a run club here in Montreal. I just moved to Montreal a couple of weeks ago. Went to a run club, met this guy Raj, and I was talking to him, chatting away. I was like, "What do you do?" He works in software dev. He's interested in AI. He was like, "What are you doing?" I was like, "Oh, like I run a kind of big newsletter in space." He's like, "Oh, what's it called?" And I was like, "The AI Report." He's like, "One of my favorite newsletters. I read it
Yeah,
every
it's a
single
great
day."
feeling. It's the best feeling on earth. It really is. It really is.
It's wild that something that I've been working away in a fucking cave in a wee work for the past 2 years is something that people read, and something that people get value out of, and something that people
Yep.
find interesting.
It
It's
was the
crazy.
first thing I read this morning when I woke up, right?
I'm
So
glad.
I'm another one of those people. Like build things. Building things is a beautiful thing to do.
Awesome. You've reignited the fire under me, Ethan. It has
Awesome.
been an absolute pleasure getting to speak to you more in depth. We've had a lot of back and forth conversations over projects, but to get to know you a bit more intimately has been
Yeah,
super fun. I appreciate the time.
an absolute blast. Love being here.
Awesome. And if anyone wants to kind of find more about you or the company, where did they go?
Yeah, awesome. So first off, you can go to orbitflows.com. That is the main website for the software product there. We are happy to offer a 30% discount to anybody who comes in through this podcast, just because we love the audience here. So we can put that coupon code somewhere if we want to.
Below.
And also, too, I do all of the onboardings right now if you request that. So I'm happy to build out your own AI content production system for you with all of my nuance and expertise there. And then we also run webinars specifically based on AI for copywriting and a lot of the deep prompt engineering techniques that go into that. Those run every Friday now, and the link for that is on the homepage of the site as well.
Beautiful. Ethan, again, thank you for your time.
Absolutely. Glad to be here.